All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today is providing rape crisis services to incarcerated survivors. We'll be going from 1 to 2:30 today. My name is Edward Cervantes. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior program officer at Just Detention International. I will be co-facilitating today with my colleague Jenica Sinor. You want to introduce?
Yeah, hi folks. I know a lot of folks on this call, but some names I don't recognize. So if this is your first time meeting us, welcome. My name is Jenica Sinor. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a project manager here at Valor or Valor US. Um, and then just a little bit of a preface in case you are newer to this phase. Actually we'll talk a little bit more about the California Advancing PREA project, but as we go through slides today, while a lot of things can apply to like any detention facility, like our expertise a lot of times can be in California facilities. So we just want to put that emphasis out there. Um, okay, but while I'm still talking, the Valor or Valor US, formerly the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault or CalCASA, we're committed to preventing and ending sexual violence by advancing equity and eradicating oppression. We provide technical assistance, leadership, vision, and resources to rape crisis centers, individuals, and other entities committed to ending sexual violence. And then ultimately, what we envision is a world free from violence, where the dignity of every person is valued and respected.
And Just Detention International, or JDI for short, is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. JDI carries out its mission by working with corrections officials, rape crisis advocates, and policymakers to make sure that detention facilities are safe. We work to promote public attitudes that value the dignity and safety of people in detention, and to support incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. JDI's core principle is that when the government takes away somebody's freedom, it takes on an absolute responsibility to protect that person's safety. No matter what crime someone has committed, rape is never part of the penalty. The California Advancing PREA project is a partnership between JDI and Valor, and it is funded by the California Office of Emergency Services, or Cal OES. Through this collaboration, we hope to provide local rape crisis centers with the resources and support that they need to establish and provide a full range of services to incarcerated survivors in our state. Today, we will begin by talking briefly again about the issue of sexual abuse in detention and recap some of what we covered in part one of this series, where we talked about setting up services at your local detention facilities. And that was last month, if you all were with us. We'll then cover some special considerations for when you're providing services to people who are incarcerated. And then we'll talk more in depth about taking hotline calls from people who are inside, providing support via written correspondence, which we hope you're all already doing, and then accompanying incarcerated survivors to forensic exams. Throughout today's presentation, we really want you to be thinking about how you might need to adapt your programs and services to better serve the needs of people who are incarcerated. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to invite you all to arrive fully into this space, both physically and mentally. So if I may, I'd like to ask us all to briefly close our eyes, or to soften our gaze, and then take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Let's do that again. Inhale deeply and release. And as you settle in, gently bring your attention to the present moment. You might be joining from different places with different thoughts and emotions. But in this moment, we're here together. We're sharing this space with curiosity and with care. And I invite you to set aside any distractions and to give yourself permission to be fully present here with us right now. This is a space for learning and reflection and connection. As you listen, know that your voice and your questions are welcome. We want and we hope that you'll leave here today feeling more confident in your own abilities to serve people who are incarcerated. So let's take one more deep breath together. Inhale and exhale. And we thank you all for being here. And if at any point the discussion feels too challenging, we want you to honor that need and take a deep breath or stretch or step away for a moment. Taking care of yourself is part of being fully engaged here with us. All right. So before we start talking about the different services you can provide to people who are behind bars, let's do a quick recap of what we covered during part one of this series. According to a back of the envelope estimate by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or BJS, roughly 200,000 people are sexually abused in U.S. detention facilities each year. Note that this figure represents the number of people and not the number of incidents. So many of these 200,000 people are abused more than once, and that's not always by the same perpetrator. Um, that available data The available data on perpetrators of abuse in adult detention settings is nearly equally split between people in custody and abuse which is perpetrated by staff. And by staff, we mean not only uniformed corrections officers, but anyone who works at the detention facility. So that could be um, the religious chaplain, it could be volunteers who come in, could be the kitchen staff. It's anybody who gets to leave at the end of the day, gets counted as staff. And so that's what the BJS data tells us. But it's also important to remember that when we use the term incarcerated survivors, we're not talking only about people who were assaulted during their incarceration, but also about folks who were victimized prior to their incarceration. And we know that the rates of trauma for people who get locked up is really high. These survivors also have the right to rape crisis services, just as they do out in the community. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, recognizes the importance of rape crisis services for survivors who are in detention facilities. PREA provides a floor of basic, common sense access to advocates and their services for incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse. PREA says that facilities must attempt to enter into an MOU with community service providers or the Rape Crisis Center, your agency, who can provide confidential emotional support services related to sexual abuse, and then also provide mailing addresses and telephone numbers to rape crisis organizations. So those are the posters that are up that maybe you all have helped put up. That's a requirement under PREA. PREA also states that facilities must make incarcerated survivors aware of the extent to which these communications will be treated as confidential and make victim advocates available to survivors during forensic medical examinations and also investigatory interviews. So that's not always put in place, the investigatory interview part, but it's certainly something that we're hearing from more of you that you're being invited to. So as that happens, we definitely hope that you will reach out, and if you have any questions about what that needs to look like, we're happy to help in any way. While PREA does not mention in-person services or advocacy on behalf of survivors, we know that these services have a deep impact on the healing of individual survivors, but also on the culture of entire institutions. The ability of your agency to offer these additional services rests on your ability to build trust and strong relationships with facility staff. So use the skills you've developed when working with other law enforcement agencies. You want to be consistent, Don't allow yourselves to be intimidated. Corrections definitely have their own ways, but I would say that the code can be cracked and it can be used to your benefit, not just to your benefit, but to the benefit of the survivors that you will hopefully be working with. You go to bat every day for survivors. That's what you do, right? You and your agency figure things out and you navigate new systems regularly. So it shouldn't be any different for incarcerated survivors. In fact, whether a survivor is incarcerated or not, there are universal needs that are shared by all survivors. It's easy to be intimidated but by the system. But I think the important thing to remember is that with some tweaks, the skills and experience that you already have can be used to show up for incarcerated survivors in really meaningful ways that can really impact their own healing journey. Um, yeah, and hopefully break that cycle of recidivism. So, as you might imagine, incarcerated survivors face additional barriers as they navigate their feelings or their healing. So, in the chat, let's take a minute to type in what you think some of those barriers and challenges might be. Cristina says limited resources. Absolutely. And please, we'd love to hear from all of you. Or if anybody wants to unmute, if you're feeling super um, engaged right now and you want to share some of the challenges that you've seen, please do so. Jody says lack of privacy. Also, Ariana, privacy. Lack of family support due to the facility location. Oh, yeah, that's really important. Lack of info. Yeah, someone who is incarcerated has very little control over their own body and over their environment. And this is something that is exacerbated by the general lack of autonomy and privacy, as was mentioned. Incarcerated survivors are often forced to have ongoing contact with their abuser. And there's the ever-present threat of further abuse, and then also of retaliation. It is common for any survivor to feel alone in their trauma and their feeling and their healing. But this is especially true for incarcerated survivors, because they're often actually isolated, especially in the aftermath of an assault, where they may be placed into solitary confinement. Also things like restraints and invasive searches, which are really commonplace in jail and prison settings, can be incredibly triggering for survivors. Unfortunately, staff often misunderstand big trauma reactions that somebody might have to those triggers. Um, those might be interpreted as something that requires disciplinary action. But we often hear from advocates that that's one area where they can do advocacy. If you can explain how something might be related to somebody's trauma, then you might help that staff person understand where it's coming from and how to actually help somebody through that experience rather than to discipline them and which often means loss of certain privileges. So that's what advocacy inside can look like. So when working with any survivor, but maybe especially those who are or were formerly incarcerated, it might be helpful to use something that we call or that is called the empowerment model. One of the main tenets of the empowerment model is that the survivor and not the advocate is the expert in their own lives. So this is why when we're talking with or writing to survivors, we offer options rather than advice. We don't tell folks what to do, especially because what might work for one person might not work for somebody else. And also, we often don't actually know. We don't have the answers. We're not. aware of every process in a system or at a facility, and that's okay. We know it can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. You can let the survivor lead. Let them let you know what their options are and explore that with them. Another part of the empowerment model highlights the importance of confidentiality and of being transparent about your limits. This is crucial, especially for building trust. When working with all survivors, and especially incarcerated survivors, it is very important to explain who you are, where you work, and who you're going to be sharing information with. We want to give survivors back a sense of their own agency and of their own dignity, and we want to help them feel more in control of their process, of whether to report or not, and how to tell their story, and also their own healing. Validating a survivor's feelings and experience are a key part of the empowerment model. Like I mentioned before, while many of the skills that you already have from working with survivors who aren't incarcerated are transferable to working with people who are locked up. But there's a few key areas where it's important to make adjustments. And three areas that we'd like to go over now are the referrals that you're going to make, the coping skills that you offer, and also the safety planning that you provide. So, generally, when working with survivors who aren't incarcerated, we might make referrals to other departments and agencies that we think might be better suited to meet a survivor's needs. But for people who are incarcerated, you are the resource. Like you're the referral. They likely have already been referred to you. So we want to break that cycle of referrals because often the other agencies don't respond, right? Or what they do, they'll just send them to over to you. And chances are that the survivor has already reached out to everybody on the different resource guides that get circulated inside. Information inside travels and it stays there. So the resource guide from 2004 that somebody sent out is still in there. And likely everybody's already written to them. So as much as possible, you want to avoid adding to somebody's frustration about that. Stamps and envelopes aren't easy to come by. So just be aware of that. Uh, and before, so that being said, you're not going to be able to do everything for somebody. Like you want to be clear about your limits, right? You're a rape crisis agency. You provide support around sexual abuse. You provide information to survivors about their rights and all of that. There's going to be things that they ask for that are outside of your scope of work. So you can be clear about your limits. And if it makes sense to provide a referral, we recommend that you actually call the referral. Pick up the phone. This is something that we do all the time. Pick up the phone and ask, hey, I'm working with an incarcerated survivor. Do you provide services to people who are at such and such facility? You want to ask them who the envelope should be addressed to, who should the letter be addressed to, what's the best way for a survivor to actually make contact with you, what services can you actually provide. As much of the legwork as possible, you want to be sure to do that because it's easy for us. We can take a few minutes to enter some stuff into Google and see what comes up to make the phone call because it's easier for us than it is for the person who is incarcerated. So you want to make sure that the referral that you make is as warm as possible,
Yes.
while also being prepared for there not to be a referral. There might not be somebody that does the thing that the survivor needs. So in that case, you want to help the survivor navigate that frustration and then explore self-advocacy solutions. And I see in the chat, only if we can have our phone to Google. So yes, in the moment, if you're inside, chances are that you're not going to be able to have your phone. Absolutely. I'm talking about when somebody calls the hotline. It's actually prep work. Like you're going to need to do a little bit of legwork beforehand. And we definitely encourage you to do so. Check out the resources that are available. What are some common things that people will ask for, have asked for, and do that work in advance so that you already know. So if you get a call on the hotline, you already know, you already have your list, you have your cheat sheet that you can turn to. That's what we recommend.
Yeah, I just
Then,
want to, sorry, can I just jump in real quick too? I
yeah.
love the idea of like that prep work, that work ahead of time. And maybe that's a good way to build, this work into your larger community. Talk to the partners that you're already talking to. Are they serving? Are they able to serve incarcerated survivors in some way? Can they exchange letters with someone? Can they provide resources? And then the other thing, when you were talking through some of the legwork and some of the, calling an agency ahead of time and saying, hey, do you serve incarcerated folks? How do they reach out to you? Do you receive collect phone calls? Do you asking those questions? One of the things that came to mind, and we used to do this in my prior job, is asking, are there barriers? Are there things that would cause you not to serve someone? That could be that someone's certain crimes, certain offenses, even if it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, means that they can't access services at that agency. Or there could be those barriers. And how heartbreaking would it be if you're like, okay, this resource is X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be great. And it's such a warm handoff. And then that's the piece, right? As much as we, understand and we want to make sure that folks are receiving services, that's a hard stop for some folks at other agencies, unfortunately. So just wanted to add that question. What barriers or what, could cause you not to provide a service for this person?
Word. Thank you, Jenica.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important to be clear about that, as hard as that would be on a hotline call or in a letter. Um, and all of this, especially, so we're going to talk more specifically about um, providing support via written correspondence. And one of the reasons that we really encourage you all to do more letter writing is that you are able to do that research. Like when somebody reaches out and they ask for something in a letter, you can take the time to do that research and like provide something that's really solid and that you've already vetted. Um, really taking your time and being thorough with it. But again, often there won't be somebody. And so it's really more about helping the survivor process that frustration and to figure out ways and explore options for them to do self-advocacy within the facility often. Like those are the options that they're going to have. Um, but just be aware that they might not want to do that. They probably have already been let down multiple times. There's a reason why they don't trust anybody at the facility. So just be aware of that and respect that and don't push too hard, um, because then that'll break the trust that they may have developed with you, right? They're going to look at you as somebody who doesn't get it. Like, oh, you just don't get it. Um, because to us, we think like, oh, there's got to be mental health support at the jail or at the prison, right? Duh, like there has to be. But that's not often the case, or what is available is really limited. Um, it's not going to look like what we think it would look like. So just trust that the survivor knows, let them lead, and just help them explore their own options. Okay, so now let's talk about coping skills. Because again, what we might offer to somebody who isn't incarcerated is going to be a little bit different than what we offer to somebody who is incarcerated. Coping skills that require little to no extra materials and that can be done without attracting attention are some of the best or safest options for survivors who are behind bars. But of course, it's always best practice to talk through any coping strategies that the survivor is already using. Ask them what's worked for them in the past. Um, that being said, it's super important to have some go-to exercises that you can offer. Have a breathing exercise that you like, that you can offer to somebody when they're on a hotline call. with you, or progressive muscle relaxation, journaling, or mindfulness and meditation are also good options. For those who are not familiar with it, progressive muscle relaxation, or PMR, is an exercise that relaxes your mind and body by progressively tensing and relaxing muscle groups throughout your entire body. We've created a handout that you can use to help guide a client through this process. Um, that will be, I'm going to put it in the chat right now, actually. Oh, you are on it. Thank you, Jenica. So Jenica has put it in the chat. That's something that we include in all of our packets. Um, we have stacks and stacks printed. It's helpful. People, I think, really like it. It's one easy exercise that I think people can understand, and that's really helpful. Mindfulness is also another helpful coping skill. Mindfulness includes focusing on the breath, particularly, but also other senses like your sights, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Um, but be aware that mindfulness can be particularly challenging for survivors, especially if their primary way of coping has been to numb themselves or to distract themselves from distressing sensations or thoughts. It's something that I facilitate mindfulness groups at some prisons here in California. And yeah, a lot of the people don't want to pay attention to the sounds. I do a sound meditation. And it can be really challenging because things like the keys, the sound of the keys coming or the footsteps in the hallway cause a lot of distress. There's a way to work with that, but just be aware that it can cause a lot of distress. So if it's something that isn't going to work for somebody, think of something else. Journaling perhaps can be really helpful. I think it would be helpful to have some go-to prompts that you can provide to people. Um, But one thing to be aware is that it can be a safety concern for there to be, you know, journal writings under their bunks or something. So if journaling is something that somebody's interested in, you can offer to them the idea of tearing it up. Tear it up, put some of the shreds in one garbage basket, flush them down the toilet. The toilets flush really loud. That's a whole other thing that causes a lot of trauma. So it could be really cathartic to like throw the papers in the toilet and hear it get swooshed away. Um, so just have some options to provide to people, I think is our suggestion. Okay, so in the chat, we'd love to hear from you if you have any uh, coping skills that you've heard from people inside that have been helpful to them, or if there's something that you've offered that has really resonated with survivors. We'd love to hear from you because as much as possible, we love for this to be joint learning. Do we have any? I'm going to start putting people on the spot. Drawing and artistic expression. I've often heard they enjoy reading and taking the cooking classes at the facility. Oh my goodness, cooking classes. That's amazing. One-to-one counseling for sure. Doing something that they love to do. Journaling. Awesome. My clients' worksheets that I can send them. Also coloring pages. I love that. Yeah, if you can find some worksheets or create some worksheets. I think that that's great. And I love the idea of coloring pages. Absolutely. Most people do have access, if they have money on their books, to some basic art supplies. Um, so definitely, I think coloring pages is a good idea. Reading for sure. Check with your facility if you can bring in books. I've heard of people um, creating their own lending libraries because books are hard to come by. So definitely, if you can bring books or suggest books, absolutely. Exercise, 100%. Um, in my mindfulness groups, I do a mindful movement meditation, and they love that. It feels super goofy at first, but by the end of the 12 weeks, everybody's super into it. And I've heard people reach back out to say that they have incorporated some of the movements like into their daily, um, practice, because there's some that they can do without uh, bringing too much attention to themselves. So shoulder rolls is a really good one that people like, or the cherry picking. Uh, but anyway, yes, and I saw faith as well, for sure.
Edward, I think one of the things that I have found, I've created my own list of coping skills for incarcerated that I usually hand out that came from people I've worked with
Love
that
it.
has worked for them inside. So, and I'm just usually in a local jail,
Okay.
but even if there are things that they come up with that they used to do on the outside, they can't like take a nice bubble bath, go for a swim, but going for a walk, they could still walk around the room or inside the common area and still get some of those and some visualization type of
Mm.
exercises. So just imagining you're somewhere else, which is helpful at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And with visualization, one thing that I like to tell people is to remember all of the senses. Like thinking about how the breeze feels on your skin can really help transport you there. Um, so yeah, getting people to think about all of the senses when doing those visualizations can help. Thank you, Jody. I really appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so before I hand things over to Jenica to talk about hotline calls, I also want to go over some considerations when doing safety planning with incarcerated survivors. Safety planning with people inside can be challenging, not just for them, but also for us. We want to figure out ways to get people to safety, but that won't always be possible. And that can be hard, right? Like we want to go in and change things for people. But people inside don't get to decide where they live. They can request to be moved, uh, but that can bring more unwanted attention. And their requests it's rare for those housing requests to be made or to be approved. So it might not be possible for them to get away from their abuser. And if the abuser is a staff person, it might be even more difficult to come up with a safety plan. But remember the empowerment model. The survivor is the expert and trust that they know best. They've been keeping themselves safe or doing as best as they can to keep themselves safe. So they are probably already are doing a lot to make themselves feel safe. So it might just be helpful to talk things through with them and to help them recognize the things that they are already doing. Again, we want to help the survivor feel more in control. Maybe there's a certain time that's safe for them to go to the shower, for example, or ask if they have a friend, somebody that they trust, that can be the lookout for them. Um, that can be really difficult for us to think in that way. Um, which focusing more on harm reduction than on actually like making sure that somebody is safe but that's what they're doing on a daily basis. So our job is just to help them navigate that, explore their own options, come up with their own solutions. Self-advocacy. Always remember the empowerment model and that the survivor knows best. Especially because we're just not going to be that familiar with the ins and outs of any of the facilities that we're working with. And talking about physical safety alone might not be enough, especially for incarcerated survivors who have such little control over their movement and their surroundings. So include emotional safety in any of that planning that you're doing. Explore awareness of triggers and ways that survivors can distract themselves when they do feel unsafe. and make follow-up support a part of any plan that you do. This could include encouraging survivors to call your hotline when they're feeling triggered. Always remember the hotline. I feel like they're not being used enough. So if you can um, set a goal for yourself to like increase the use of the hotline, that would be amazing. We're always encouraging everybody to do it. Um, we also want to, help people write down their feelings and share them with you, um, and remind them that they can write to you at any time, and build trust in your own services and what you can provide for people. Jenica, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Edward. I love how much you really honed in on, building a plan with the survivor and using the empowerment model. And you had said something earlier about, if we provide referrals to something, and it can, if it's a referral that doesn't work out, or if it's a referral that doesn't serve an incarcerated person or whatnot, it's really clear that like you don't get it, right? And I think that really it's important to keep in mind that like you want to make sure that you're approaching some of these conversations with an element of humility and an element of you maybe not understanding what someone is going through day to day, and definitely not understanding maybe what that detention facility is like day to day or what it could look like. And so you know there's a lot of trust that can be built when we approach these conversations with some humility and some, hey, let's talk about what this could look like. What have you done historically to make sure that you feel safe? Or what have you done historically, like to make sure that, what does that look like for you as an individual? Because our concept of safety is going to be really different as someone who's trying to survive inside of a prison. It's going to look super different. There are sacrifices that someone has to make and assess on a daily basis while they're inside of a detention facility. So, just wanting to really hone in on that humility piece and that building a plan with someone, right? Not going in and saying, okay, I'm going to create a safety plan for you. Of course, nobody on this call is going to do that. But, I think oftentimes we can come in with like a real strong plan, and that's from a really great place. But that collaboration and empowerment piece to go a long way, especially for folks that are incarcerated. Okay, off of my soapbox and onto another one around hotline services. So one of the main services that we offer in our agencies are hotlines. So 24-hour hotline provided for survivors, incarcerated or not. It's a service that's available for folks. We all kind of know the drill. Folks can reach out and access an advocate generally within a couple of minutes. It really depends on how your hotline is set up. But this is a crucial service for when folks are really needing that warm voice or needing that those resources or needs to talk through something. So as with any hotline call, no matter where it comes from, we might spend the first couple minutes assessing what type of call it's going to be. Is it a crisis call that starts off running and you were catching up trying to figure out what's going on? Is it an emotional support call? Is it something where someone's really quiet at the beginning and you are spending some time, not rushing that person, but, seeing how you can make them feel a little bit more comfortable to lean into that phone call? Is it something that's heavy on information or resources? And in those, first couple moments, you'll be really kind of assessing what that's going to look like. You might also make it really clear about like what services are available, what services can you provide, what services are available to that survivor, because there's such a lack of resources in general, and your phone call is likely a free phone call that they can make, or it should be a free phone call that they can make, and it's one of only a few. It's not uncommon for folks to get phone calls that are asking for services that are way outside of your scope of services, and we can approach that in a really respectful and kind way, and provide referrals if there are some, but also be really clear about this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. We'll also want to be really mindful of time constraints. Likely the person on the other end of the phone call knows that they have 15 minutes, knows that they have 20 minutes. It's also our job to make sure that we are aware of that as well. And then, talking about confidentiality, understanding that they might be in a space where it's more communal and there are people, around that may hear what they're talking about, and that might change how they engage in a phone call with you. I've been on a number of calls where someone, is more comfortable answering yes or no questions than sharing, a divulging information or sharing, private information. Or it might be that someone is really weary and not trusting of a hotline call because all of their other phone calls are recorded, and how is this one any different? And that's really valid. That's really real. And trust is really eroded and really complex with within a detention facility. And it's our job to really understand where that comes into play into our work. Over promising and saying, oh, no, none of your information is ever gonna get out. It's never gonna, nobody's ever gonna know, nobody's ever gonna hear anything, is a little bit of an over promise. But what you can't promise is that information that is shared with you, you specifically aren't going to share that information. And as far as, especially in California, we've worked really hard to try to make sure that phones are confidential and not monitored. And as far as they're confidential and not monitored. As far as we know, they're confidential and not monitored. And just sharing that information. Yeah, okay, so I'll go to the next slide. It's real quick and really easy for me to like ramble about these kind of things. So I'll try to keep it a little bit tighter. First and foremost, Edward's talked a lot about this, the general emotional support. Emotional support goes a long way. We really want to normalize someone's trauma reactions and remind survivors that the assault is not their fault. Even more so with survivors inside of a detention facility, acknowledging that they didn't deserve that. They didn't deserve being assaulted. They didn't deserve being treated the way they were treated. And they are deserving of feeling safe. We should also be really mindful that in general, a detention setting is already triggering. Edward mentioned the sound of the keys. There's also really invasive strip searches and a hyper-controlled environment that can really heighten those trauma reactions. We also have to recognize that talking about sexual abuse is not welcome. And it's often really dangerous in detention settings. You might be the very first person that this caller has opened up to about their assault. We talked a lot about coping skills, so we can offer those relevant coping skills. We can also brainstorm together what coping skills you already know that you enjoy. Or think back to, use a strengths-based model of like, if you think about a time where you were feeling good or feeling like you had a good sense of, your mood or whatnot, or have you taken any classes about coping skills? If someone's been in a facility for 10, 15 years, you've likely taken some classes around mindfulness. You've likely taken or picked up a pamphlet or something. It goes a long way to brainstorm with someone what maybe has worked for them before. And I loved in the chat when we were talking about coping skills, it wasn't all meditation, which is beautiful. Meditation is a beautiful space. But I saw folks talk about journaling, reading, exercise, faith-based stuff that isn't necessarily, part of kind of, reading, exercise, all goes a really long way. Faith-based, absolutely. Offering to brainstorm, relevant coping skills that make sense inside of a detention facility. Someone mentioned earlier, we're not going to tell someone to take a bath. Absolutely, we're not. That's just not appropriate. And then I was going to talk a little bit more about resources here, but really, like Edward, you hit the nail on the head as far as like resources and when it's appropriate and when it's, doesn't quite make sense to provide resources when they're not available or if they're not appropriate resources as far as like the agency not supporting incarcerated folks. I really just want to reiterate, if resources or solutions, right, or outcomes are really limited and you only provide that emotional support and that validation, that's okay. Obviously, like when you can provide that additional advocacy, when you can provide that additional, those additional resources when they're available, when it's an option, that's amazing and that's best case scenario. But knowing that oftentimes that emotional support is what you're going to be able to offer during that hotline call and being okay with that. I know as advocates, a lot of us are doers. A lot of us are people that need to that get results and are really empowered by being able to like make a big difference. And it's hard to see that emotional support making that big difference, but it does. That validation, that listening ear. Yeah, go ahead.
No only, no just.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Right.
people aren't getting the validation this sport, so
No, no,
it really is
totally.
important.
Mhm. If you're talking to someone who's thinking about reporting, you can help walk them through this process and what it might look like to make a report. You can ask them if there are staff members, and staff could look like, admin staff. It could look like a church staff. It could look like another teacher. It could look like a volunteer. Someone that they do feel comfortable sharing what happened, or at least sharing the beginning of what happened so that a report starts. um Suggest having them start that report with that person. Of course, there'll be staff that follow up on that report, and that looks a little bit different. But if there's a safe person that they feel comfortable sharing that information with, if there's no staff, and that's not uncommon, there's no safe staff that they feel like they can trust, and they'd like to report, you can refer them to an outside reporting agency, which is usually available through like a specific hotline or a mailing address. In California, if it's the Office of Inspector General. Survivors can also make reports in writing, and slip a note to a certain staff person, and then that starts that process of a report being made. Um, they can also talk to, a loved one on the outside. Do they have a regular phone call with their loved one? And their loved one can help them start that report process. It's, I'm speaking of these kind of vaguely, but it's really important for you to have that relationship with your facility and relationship with, with the facility, and understand like what reporting options look like at that specific facility that you're working with. Again, speaking back to that prep work that Edward was saying about knowing what that looks like at the specific facility that you're working with. A lot of times survivors can also call when they have already made a PREA report. They've already made the report and it hasn't gone anywhere, and they're mad, and they're understandably mad, and they're understandably really frustrated and feeling really unsafe and feeling devastated. Even if the case has been, maybe it was investigated and it was found that it was unsubstantiated, meaning that there was insufficient evidence to support the report of abuse, or it was unfounded, meaning the investigation found that the assault was unlikely to have taken place as described. And that can be a really devastating place. That can be a really frustrating and agonizing place. They went through all of the trouble to make the report, and to just reach a place where it's not being investigated, it's not being taken seriously, is incredibly invalidating. When we get those kind of calls, and that kind of, more of it's through a letter or an in-person visit, we can really echo what we do in the community and provide that validation and that frustration, and just really you know validate their concerns and their frustrations with the system. Even though a lot of times as we're working with detention facilities, we're holding both relationships. We're holding a relationship with the detention facility because we need them to let us in, and we need their support when we are helping advocate around PREA, or around helping someone get answers around their investigation, or whatever we're working on with the facility itself. We do need those relationships to be good relationships, and we need them to be professional relationships, and they hold a lot of power in being able to allow us to provide services or not. But we're also holding that relationship with the survivor, and that's our priority, right? So if you're hearing from a survivor and you're hearing that they're mad at the system, they're hearing that they're mad that that their report's not being taken seriously, you can validate that. It's really important to validate that. It's really important to acknowledge, like, yeah, it's really awful. It's horrific. Let's talk through, how awful that is. Let's talk through a grievance process. Let's talk through what other, options there might be. And holding both of those at the same time, it's a balance, but it's really important that we hold that balance. And that during that time when we're supporting someone through through the aftermath of filing a PREA report, that we're keeping at the forefront that understanding of how broken the system is. Okay. And next we'll talk about written correspondence.
Thank you, Jenica. Yeah, so letters are still one way the people who are incarcerated can reach out to you. People inside still write letters. Like I said, the resource guides from 2004 are still circulating in there because people are still writing. We maybe have moved on to texting and all of that, but letters and traditional USPS are still the primary way for people who are incarcerated to communicate with the outside world. Um, so we really hope that you all have a letter writing program in place, that you all know how you would respond if somebody does reach out to you via letter. So in the chat, we'd love for you to tell us if you do receive letters from people inside. And if you do, how often are you getting letters generally? I know that you all probably are reporting that, but we'd love to hear still. If you can take a moment in the chat, let us know, are you getting letters? When was the last time that you actually responded in writing to somebody who reached out to you? Diana says yes.
Yeah, and while folks are typing that into the chat too, if you don't have a letter writing program, or you are maybe not receiving as many letters as you'd like, and you want to brainstorm ways to improve that, or you have questions about what that could look like, we'll plug our emails into the chat, later on, and we'll also have an opportunity for folks to like sign up to schedule a call if you want to brainstorm those things. If you're not someone that we already regularly meet with, I know we have a lot of familiar faces on here, but we are a little bit of nerds when it comes to this kind of work and answering these kind of questions.
Um, so Rochelle said we're from a rural community and do not receive letters. Once in a while, it is a hotline call. Annalise says, I typically receive letters from our clients who attended our support groups that month. Amazing. I love that you are doing support groups. And yeah, so that if you provide one service, it's really great to be able to provide all of the others, right? Because people who attend your support groups, they love it. They feel like they connected with you. Of course, they're going to want to know how to be in touch with you. So being able to provide that letter writing, to have the hotline and say, hey, when you're in crisis and you need to talk to somebody, remember that you have that 15-minute hotline call. If I'm not available, somebody else in my agency who's been trained the same way, we speak the same language, they'll be there for you. To be able to offer that full range of services, I think can be really powerful. I've been doing counseling through letter writing for about 2 years now. Love that. So if you have any suggestions as we go through this next section, Annalee, please do feel free to chime in. Like I said, we want this to be a knowledge sharing moment for all of us. So
Yeah, did you kind of want to know like how I go about
yeah,
counseling through letter writing? Okay.
would love that.
Okay, let me turn on my camera. Okay. Yeah, so the way I kind of go about it is I do like that first introductory letter, obviously highlighting our services, and I ask some initial questions, which always has to do with what um what are the three main needs that you are in need of at this moment, that what in your healing journey, like when you start as you're starting your healing journey, what three aspects of your life do you want to focus on? I always hone down on that so that, it kind of gives them an idea of how to respond to me and how this is going to go. And so when I receive their letter back to me, they let me know, hey, I would like some help in this area. Sometimes it's more than three, but I like to start off with three because obviously we're not just going to tackle all of them at the same time. But that gives me an idea of how we're going to go about their healing journey and how I can do my work on my end to target those areas they want to work on. And most of the time, I am looking online for some like activities or topics or anything I can send back so they can start, really writing that down and working on it. And it's been very successful.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Annalie.
Of
Perfect.
course. Of
I really appreciate that.
course.
Okay, Jenica, if we can go to the next slide. All right, so as we talked about in part one of this series, it is important to have a system in place before you offer a service. So if letter writing is going to be new for your agency, there's some things that you should think through in advance. For example, where would the letters be stored and for how long? So this is some of the nuts and bolts as you start to think about your program. How will you actually handle the letters that you receive and your responses so that they're secure, confidential, and safe? If your agency uses a database, maybe there's a way that you can incorporate that so that you can save the letters on there, do scans. We also want you to consider how you're going to track the letters for your monthly reporting. You may need to think of additional ways that letters will be sorted and read if you're doing remote work. We at JDI receive thousands of letters every year. We have an entire filing room in our office with decades worth of correspondence. It's like the main part of probably the only reason that we still have a physical office is because of the letters that we have and there's so many filing cabinets. It takes an entire team of people for us to respond, and we regularly reevaluate our own process. Currently, we have one person who scans the letters and then we save it into the database, and there's another person that enters stuff into our client database. And then it takes a whole team of us to actually respond to the letters. So, different people respond to different things. Um, so it's a challenge for us to keep up. It definitely takes a lot of work. However, if you're getting letters from just one or two facilities, we hope that it's fully possible for you to stay on top of the letter correspondence that you're getting, and that you offer really thorough, thoughtful, consistent responses to people. Again, and we hear so often about how powerful it is just to get a letter back, to get a response that's tailored, that's not a template. So in templates, there is a way for you to have some template or stock language that you can use, right? So that you're not starting every letter from scratch, but you want each letter to be tailored to the individual who's writing to you. Because that's going to make them know that you care, that you took the time to read their letter. And like Annalie mentioned, that you're actually thinking about what their specific needs are. That's going to go a long way towards helping that survivor start to heal and to start to trust again that somebody is out there that cares. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about confidentiality. As many of you know, since you're in California, CDCR has agreed to treat mail that is marked with this evidence code 1035.4. Any letter that's marked with that on the outside is to be treated as confidential. Um, so that means that uh, letters with that code are not to be read by staff and are opened in the presence of um, the individual. So they're still going to be opened by staff, but it's going to be done in front of them so that staff aren't actually going through and reading the contents of the letter. So in order to protect your clients and provide confidentiality or confidential advocacy, be sure to use this label that I'm going to put in the chat now that Valor has created. So that's like you can print those on labels and use that. But you could also just write the evidence code on the front of the envelope, and that should be enough. But so if you're writing to somebody in CDCR custody, you'll use that. If you're corresponding with somebody at the jail, it may be something different. So it's important to figure that out in advance. And that's something that you could include in the MOU, for example, in order for confidential or for mail to be considered confidential, this and this step will be taken. Um, so just figure that out in advance. And that's something that likely your supervisor will be doing with their main contact at the facility. Can we do the next slide, Jenica? Okay, before you mail out a response, please always confirm the survivor's location. People are often moved, so when they write to you, there's going to be one address on the envelope, but it could be that by the time the letter actually reaches you, they're already somewhere else. And that's especially true if somebody has made a report or if somebody is considered a troublemaker, which is often, somebody who's in crisis. They might be moved around quite a bit. So before you mail out anything, do one last check to make sure that the address that you have for them is the most current one. CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and the Federal Bureau of Prison have really simple, user-friendly locators. So you could just Google them and they'll pop up. County jails all vary. Some have locators. Other smaller facilities might require a phone call. Like you might just need to pick up the phone and ask whoever answers, like, hey, I just want to check that so-and-so person is at your facility, and they'll let you know, or they'll confirm that they're still there. Okay, so what can you expect when somebody writes to you? Letters can vary in length. Some letters may be a single sentence, such as, please send me all the books that you have available, tell me what services you offer, put me on your mailing list. Could be very simple, straightforward. Other letters might stretch out over many pages. And that's because maybe they're, stream of conscious releasing processing in that way. For long letters, I personally find it helpful to take notes on the important things, or if you have a photocopy, go ahead and highlight, okay, here's something that's important that I'm going to need to address in my response. So give the letter one read through, get a sense of what the person is needing, and then you can go back and start to address the different things on there. Remember to take your time. There's no immediate rush to pull together a response. You can take your time and be thoughtful about it. Because you do really want to be thoughtful and personal. You want to actually respond to what the person is telling you. Letters might include legal documents and other paperwork. So think through what you're going to do with that paperwork. Can you keep those documents in your filing cabinet? We at JDI do, and we find that people will reach out a year or two from now and say, hey, I sent you, and they have to know the exact dates. On this date, I sent you this information. Can you send me a photocopy? We say that we won't, but we do, because it can be really helpful to people who are filing lawsuits or whatever. And because paperwork often gets lost inside, but you need to determine whether your agency is going to be able to do that, and then be really clear about what you are doing. In regards to disclosing abuse, some letters may not directly disclose sexual abuse right away. They don't know who you are, so they might not want to share all of their business in that first initial letter. You want to build trust. So respond to them, address everything that's in the letter, and then maybe when some rapport is built, they'll actually disclose what's really going on with them, and you can help them navigate that. Um, you might also get letters where the handwriting is really difficult to read. So if you have a coworker who can maybe decipher things better, I usually have somebody where I'm like, what does this even say? I can't read this. Um, but take your time with it. And then you might also get letters that aren't in English. Spanish obviously is going to, I think, be slightly easier for most of us. But if you get other languages, don't be afraid to, I think, rely on what's available online. I love Google Translate. ChatGPT at this point is like kind of running my life. It does all of the chores. So I think it can be really helpful. When you get a letter, like I said, you want to read it all the way through once just to get a sense of what the survivor needs. From there, you can start thinking about what your response is going to be, depending on what the person is writing about. You can start by thinking about the level of safety and the level of crisis that the person is in, and then determine what type of abuse the person is describing, and the various other issues that they may be brought up. From this assessment, you can start to think about the resources that you can connect them to. Again, keeping everything that we've said before in mind. Um, and so that can be like the meat of your letter. But remember that you also want to build rapport. The goal is to provide ongoing care through the letter. So you don't need to say everything all at once. Um, Next slide, please. Thank you. So you want to treat letters as you would a hotline call. You are there to respond and to provide emotional support and safety planning. As such, you want to make sure that you respond in as timely a manner as possible. Best practice is to write within 2 business days of receiving a letter. Generally, a response should be 1 to 2 pages, even if the survivor writes several pages to you. Again, think about like if you receive a long letter, how likely are you to actually read the whole thing? And all of your responses should be typed, of course. Use at least 14 size font, and use a font that's easy to read. When you address the letter, make sure that you put the survivor's legal first name and last name and also their booking number on the envelope. So even if a survivor has shared with you, like, I prefer you use this name, please only refer to me as this name on the outside, use their legal name, unless they tell you that it's okay otherwise. If they've told you, I've legally changed my name, um, then you can put that on the outside. But otherwise, just go with the legal name that's on the locator that you use on the outside of the envelope. On the inside of the letter, that's where you can use the person's preferred name. And it's just a nice touch, to be able to validate them in that way. I also want to say you want to, as much as possible, match the survivor's writing level. So if it's clear that, the reading comprehension or writing comprehension is low, like try to match that. But always be clear and concise. You want the person to actually be able to understand what you're saying to them. So use short sentences. Be super clear, always. And also, as much as possible, try to have the same advocate respond to the same survivor. Because again, you want to build trust and rapport with people, and that's easier if it's the same person that they're writing to. And Jenny, I know we're running low on time, right? So I'll brief it. Annalie, I love everything that you shared about what you do in your letters. Um, But so for all of us, I think just going back to the basics of writing a letter, I'm sure we all learned at some point. Maybe we were passing notes in middle school, or when we first learned to like write an essay. Remember the introductory paragraph, the meat of the body, and then the conclusion. Think of your letters in that same way. So in the introductory paragraph, you want to thank the survivor for writing to you. Thank you so much for reaching out to such and such organization. We do, we provide such and such services. I'm so sorry that you were sexually assaulted by a corrections officer at such and such facility. I can only imagine how difficult that must be, but I also want to recognize how much strength it took for you to reach out to us. Thank you so much. And then next paragraph, get to the meat of it. Address the points that they made. Annalee, like you suggested, pick the three main things that you want to address. Cover those 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. And then the closing, again, validate their experience. Thank them so much for reaching out to you. And then offer some sort of a follow-up plan. That can be the basic structure of your response, but just think of it in those three chunks: introductory, the main portion, and then the concluding paragraph. Yeah, Annalee, I'd love for you to unmute yourself.
Um, yeah, you actually like described exactly how I structure my letters, which is the most important part is I think, you know, helping them realize that it is a courageous move to reach out and ask for, not even just us, it's hard to just ask for help sometimes. So, it's a great thing to acknowledge. But then also something I've learned throughout my experience letter writing as we're going about, like maybe we've sent like a couple letters back and forth and we're in the chunk of like going through their healing journey and tackling those things. I do at the end ask for their feedback on the certain activity that I'm having them work on or the topic I'm having them discuss or write about, because sometimes things may work for some people and that might not work for others. So I do like to ask them, when you respond to me, feel free to give me feedback on the activity that we worked on. And then yeah, sometimes I do get that feedback, what, this did help me because now I know this and that. So that feedback and asking for it sometimes is a good idea as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Annalee. I really like that. And yeah, it invites the back and forth. And then that's also information that you could pass along to others. Oh, I've heard somebody shared with me that this was really powerful for them. And like what
Yes.
a beautiful thing to be able to offer to somebody else and to be able to pass that knowledge along. Thank you,
Yeah.
Anna. Okay, next slide, please, Jenica. All right, so we at JDI have created a survivor packet. At this point, I feel like every person who's incarcerated in the United States has gotten one, but we think it's really helpful if you can to create your own. So put all of the information that you have available about your services into one introductory packet that you could send to the people when they first reach out to you. We also include things like a copy of the PREA standards, which people find really helpful. There's a couple other legal-ish documents that people really find helpful when they're filing their lawsuits. It's not legal advice. However, it's articles about what to do if you're interested in filing a lawsuit. People love that. We have a self-help booklet, Hope for Healing, that we include in each packet. There's a letter from a survivor. Again, just to let somebody know, like, hey, I've been through this too. Here's what helped me. It's just a nice touch that I think people really appreciate. So, but do whatever works for you. Put all of the different brochures that you have available. So that's one place where I think you can use template letters, is in that initial packet. But again, always include then a separate letter that's more directly addressed to the individual, specifically from you. And if anybody's interested in seeing what that packet looks like, feel free to reach out. We have PDFs of it. And Jenica, I'm gonna pass it over to you. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. Perfect timing for my slides to freeze up a little bit. My goodness. Let's see. How can I fix that? I'm going to stop sharing and reshare my screen in just a moment. Yeah, I see a lot of interest in that packet. Edward, maybe if you want to drop our emails in the chat so we can follow up on that. Shoot, I'm so sorry, folks. And it's like everything but Zoom that's frozen. So it's not even like I could have you share slides and me just kind of talk through.
You want me? I can share real quick.
Well, um,
No.
yeah, well, I mean, it's everything but Zoom is frozen on my computer. So, while I feel pretty confident about being able to talk through the slides, I don't shoot. Sorry, everyone, for this kind of hiccup here. Oh, and folks, I apologize. I had meant for Edward to share his email, but I will take, or we will capture your emails for the folks that have already put it in the chat. But reach out to Edward specifically about the letter packet. Okay, well, rather than me like shut my computer down and like come back, I know for the most part what's on in my notes in these slides. So maybe Edward, if I forget anything super crucial, maybe you.
Danica, I'm sharing my.
I
Can
know,
you?
I know.
Okay.
Notes, everything is frozen on. Anyways, yes, thank.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean that. So anyways, we're gonna talk about forensic exam accompaniment. And luckily I've been around for a while and I've talked about this a lot. So we got this. Thanks everybody for your patience and the hiccups. But next slide would be great. Um, when you can. So we talked about this before, but that pre-planning, that planning ahead really comes a long way when we are serving incarcerated folks. So finding out what you can about your facility's specific coordinated response plan, and better yet, becoming part of it. How can you make sure that you know what that survivor is going to be experiencing logistically? At what point does a survivor get put in touch with a investigative services in the ISU, the investigative services unit? At what point does someone get sent to get a forensic exam? Where does that forensic exam happen? Are they contracted with your local hospital like everybody else? Or are they a facility that does their exams on site at the facility, itself? Is it that those are really the only two scenarios actually. Making sure that everybody on your advocacy team understands this. So you may understand it as the person who does most of the PREA work at your agency, but does the person that responds to calls in the middle of the night, does that person understand how to serve incarcerated folks? Has that person been trained? Has your agency built the capacity of your agency overall to be able to do that? Have we, adapted resources and materials for incarcerated folks? We talked a lot about coping skills that are specific to serving incarcerated folks. You have the PMR handout. Maybe you've taken some of your trifolds and you've adapted it so it doesn't say rape crisis services all over it, because that can really draw attention to folks. So planning ahead. Next slide. So some of the key similarities between an exam that is happening with someone that's incarcerated and someone that is not incarcerated, it's actually the same forensic exam. It's going to be the same head to toe exam where, photos may be taken, physical evidence may be collected. There will be the forensic interview, where yes or no questions will be asked to determine, what evidence does need to be collected. It's performed in 99% of the cases, it's performed by a SANE or a SART nurse. There is a clause that says, like, if there's not a SANE or SART nurse available, that it can be performed by another qualified medical professional. That's not the case we ever want to happen if we can avoid it. And it's not something that is, it's common practice, but it's something that could happen. And that's really only if they've gone, extensive lengths to find a SANE or SART nurse. Survivors have a right to an advocate and a support person. So that support person could be a family member. It could be another incarcerated person. We've heard from CDCR that they won't. That's a stretch, and it's going to be really difficult to pull that off. But what we've heard from the statewide PREA coordinator is that if someone's on their visitor list already, that person is more likely to be able to be approved as their support person. So there's that. And the biggest component is the survivor needs that emotional support, and they need that advocacy. They need some of those same things that someone is going to need, whether they're incarcerated or not. They are in need of that dire support and advocacy. Okay, next slide. Some of the differences is there will likely be a use of transport restraints. So it could be that someone is in waist chains, it could be ankle shackles, it could be handcuffs. They could be in a number of different kinds of restraints. We want to, along with our SANE nurse and our SART nurse, or medical professional, the forensic examiner, will want to advocate for, as least restraints as possible, when, someone's undergoing an exam. It's just trauma informed. It's hard enough to have to go through an exam. It's even worse when you're trying to maneuver that exam while having your mobility limited. Of course, if there are safety concerns, you all will discuss that, or you also can discuss that, at the beginning of the exam or with the officers, but the likelihood of needing those restraints is pretty little. There may be additional pressure to go through the entire exam, to go through every single step. Incarcerated folks have been denied, their rights, and denied their autonomy to go through certain processes throughout, their time at a facility and even before then. And so there may be additional pressure to complete this exam, or additional pressure to go through certain parts of the investigation, or to say certain things, or to say it a certain way, or whatnot. That, of course, there's that pressure if someone's not incarcerated as well, but it looks a little bit differently when someone's incarcerated. Their support systems, their access to support systems on the outside could be limited. People have to pay for phone calls. People have to, family relationships may be strained. They don't have access to their regular coping skills or their regular support systems. And then follow-up care has to look different. Someone can't automatically just hop on the phone and call us every single time they need to, or on a timeline that makes sense for them. If someone's, really triggered and really upset, it could be that they have to wait until they're safe to, or that there's someone not around, or wait until, they have access or the ability to make that phone call. Or it could be that they're not comfortable making that phone call in general. Our common practice with survivors on the outside are, okay, we're going to call you within 2 business days, or we're going to call you within 3 business days. And that's not necessarily possible when someone's incarcerated. They have to call us, or they have to write us, or we have to write them a letter, or, we have to wait until the Tuesday because that's when visiting hours are, or, there's lots of different elements to that follow-up care. And that might look really unique in depending on what your facility does, or how you handle it with your agency. Okay, next slide. What can you expect about confidentiality? So advocate for as confidential a space as possible. If it's possible to not have an officer in the room, if it's possible to have them stand outside and it's safe for everybody, then let's do that. Let's advocate for that. Be clear about what's confidential and what's not. So while you can guarantee that you, Jenica, as an advocate, are not going to share their information with someone, if they are sharing information with the forensic examiner, if they are sharing information with the examiner while the officer's in the room, you can't guarantee that the confidentiality isn't or is intact because of the different parties that are involved. Be prepared to advocate for a survivor's right to confidentiality if needed. So if there is a moment when, you know, it makes more sense for, well, this really goes into less so like what someone's saying, but more about, you know, the physical part of the exam. If you need to advocate to have a partition up, if you need to advocate to have an officer face a wall, to really maintain someone's dignity and maintain their confidentiality, then you might be called to do that. Next slide. It might be that you're hearing from doctors, nurses, and officers using some problematic language. It could be that they are not believing the survivor. It could be that they're trying to downplay the survivor's experience. It could be happening in real time. If it's happening in real time in front of the survivor, asking to just maybe focus on the exam itself, or asking if we can limit, you know, comments until we're done with the exam, asking, you know, to take a break, to pause, you know, to check in with the survivor and see how they want you to handle some of those comments could be an option. And then you know, offering follow-up training. You know, we sometimes have to pick our battles. If a comment is being made outside of the room and it's out of earshot from a survivor, then maybe it's something that can be handled in a follow-up training, right? Maybe you don't have to choose right then and there to speak up in that way. Not that we don't address it at some point, but it might be that we have a conversation when we're not in the thick of getting the exam done and whatnot. Next slide. Again, offering that follow-up care. It could look like encouraging someone to call the hotline if they feel comfortable. It could look like confidential mail, like Edward's highlighted. In-person services. If folks offer in-person services, saying, okay, well, I'll come see you on Tuesday. And or say, you know, I'll come see you if you have a designated time, or letting them know that you're going to work on advocating or arranging an in-person visit if that's something that you already offer. If that's not something you offer, then maybe don't offer that, okay, we'll see you in person, you know, next week or so, because it can take a while to get those things set up. Okay, we're skirting right in close to 2:30. So I want to close with Frank's words here. So we always want to remember that we'll talk about incarcerated survivors all day, but there are real people and real survivors behind a lot of these stories and a lot of these scenarios. So Frank has, in his words, if I had an advocate, it would have saved me so much grief. It would have helped me through that traumatic event immensely. I didn't know who I could trust and who I could talk to about it, which appeared to be nobody. And then I'm going to share a quick feedback survey in the chat, and also open it up to questions, doing it kind of all at once. So the feedback survey helps us really know like what works in these settings, what you'd like to see more of, less of. There's also an opportunity for you to request us reach out to you and scheduling a call, like a TA call, so we can talk through, you know, setting up services in your area. And then we'll plug our emails into the chat as well.
And we're happy to stay on a few minutes. Sorry, we're 2:31, so we're going over time. We're happy to stay on if anybody has questions. I will email everybody the PDF, everybody who's requested it, the PDF of the introductory packet, so that you have that and you have an idea of what we include.
So I'm gonna stop recording.